Thanks so much. That was a beautifully articulated
Thank you.
example of the laminal fricative. So you've just said everything. We can pack up and go home. All right. So first of all, I really feel guilty. I feel like this is like the most marginal little thing I could have possibly talked about, and yet it actually is something that I've been agonising over for literally 30 years. And I'm kind of happy that I can now come and tell you what I think, and well, we can discuss it. So I'm proposing a third SIDWELL onset fricative in Austroasiatic, which is in addition to the conventional S and H that we all know and love. Oh, it works. Now, what's the context and why am I talking about it now? So those who do go to the JCL's website and download the latest papers will know that earlier this year I published a list of 500 Proto Austroasiatic etema, and this is essentially the beginning of the I had a word in my head a second ago I wanted to use. This is what comes after the Shorto compilation, right? So for 2 decades we've been stumbling like idiots using the Harry Shorto Montgomery dictionary as a kind of proxy for Proto Austroasiatic, and I've finally put my foot down and put together a list of 500 etema that I'm confident go back to Austroasiatic, and there will be more on the way. There will be an emergent growing list, which will be going. We'll be putting this list up on the ICAL, that is the International Conference of Austroasiatic Linguistics website, and then that will be extended over time. So that this is the version 1. And why am I drawing attention to this? Well, because to actually compile 500 etymologies and propose reconstructed forms, I had to be able to nominate segmental values for all the correspondences. And I've been dilly-dallying about that for some decades now, and I had to make decisions, and generally I stuck with the decisions that I'd already discussed at conferences and published about and had generally discussed with colleagues. But the last remaining unresolved segmental assignment to a regular correspondence for the consonants, I hadn't actually discussed publicly before, but I went ahead and used this solution. So what's the problem? What is the bloody problem? Some of you will be aware of the Austroasiatic word for blood. You may think there are various words for blood. It's all very confusing. So in Shorto's reconstruction, he focused on, oh, my bloody buttons, go away, okay. He focused on Mon and Khmer. They had these forms, Jim and Jian, for blood. And he proposed a voiced palatal J, followed by H, and then an R or E vowel. And in fact, this, I think, is just a local innovation in either Mon or Khmer that spread to the other. The historical form in mainland Southeast Asia is something more like what we see in Semilai or Benar, where we have Maham, Ham, and we have a loss of medial H regularly in Khmer. So we just have Mam. So something like Maham is the historical form in mainland Southeast Asia. So we've got this H that's in all of them. But then in the northern Austroasiatic languages, and I'm using that term northern rather loosely at the moment, okay, we have a root, Sam, and we see In Hmong, we have harm, and in Hmong, that H comes from an S. You're going to take my word for it for the moment. In Bugan, we have Sa, which is Psalm with the M dropped, which is quite regular. In Kasi and Palau, we have a form with a medial N, Sanam, and then we have a Psalm or Assam in the Vietic languages. So there's some sort of Psalm root in the northern Austroasiatic, and there's some sort of harm with probably an M, which I think is a reduplication of the final. Right? And then in Munda, well, we have various forms, a couple up here, but Karya, Iyam, Mundari, Mayom. If you look at the Munda data, it looks something like Mayam with a yod rather than an H. So what's going on here? We seem to have, if we think it's a segmental thing and not just some morphological shenanigans, we seem to have a yod HS correspondence, and people have come up with various explanations for this. So, as I said, Shorto had this Jahim, which we think is just due to his fixation on Mon and Khmer. We can put that aside. This issue's been known about for a long, long time. Benedict, 1976, proposed a Nisham with so I don't know what the phonetic value of this S acute is supposed to be in Benedict's notation, but I assume it's something like the laminal fricative that I'm proposing. And he proposed this nasal pre-syllable, which tries to account for both the initial M forms, but also the N infix forms. So this is kind of an ad hoc explanation for that nasal. And then Hayes in 1992, he proposed a velar fricative value for this, but otherwise basically the same solution as Benedict. And both of these were inspired to some extent. I did have the chance to talk to Hayes and also to briefly correspond with Benedict not long before he died. I was still a grad student at the time. This was inspired by the comparison to Hmong Mien forms, which suggests something like a Yam root. Anyway, I don't think we have any relation to Hmong Mien, but that's another conversation we can have. Gerard de Flock tried to explain this root by basically just packing everything in, right? The old protoform packing, where he tried to put in the M and the J and the R and the E valve and so forth. And that's not an explanation. That's just like an encyclopedia of bits and pieces, as far as I'm concerned. No disrespect to dear Gerard. Michel Philouse had quite an interesting suggestion. He proposed that the S root was basic, and he compared this to a root which he reconstructs for Vietic, which means to leak, to bleed. And then he proposed that we have various infixed or prefixed forms, which give us the other forms for blood in Austroasiatic. It may or may not be the same root because, as Gerard pointed out, it's the wrong tone for it to be the root to leak. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe Mark Elwes can chip in about that at some point. Yeah, Mark. Look at it. Let's put it all in there, that's fine. So, in Kasi Palang, we have this N infix, and this is a nominalization. And so I think we are dealing with some sort of verbal root ultimately. So peeling away that morphological layer, what do we have? So Philouse proposed that we just had some sort of spontaneous S to H change, no conditioning or other explanation. I think that's a bit unsatisfactory. So he just proposed it was ultimately from Psalm. Well, let's look at this. I went and looked to see if we could find some more examples of these phonological correspondences, and I've put together these 7. Now, there's a lot of gaps in the table, but in fact, we can see that we've got, bloody buttons. Okay, in this northern group, and remember, the Hmong H is from S. In this northern group, we've actually got a solid body of fairly basic items that have S's. All right, we have the verb to fart. We've got the number 8. We've got the verbs to breathe, to bathe. We've got the otter. We've got the word for wood or tree. These are pretty good etymologies. And then in the rest of the family, we seem to have H reflexes. See them throughout. The most complete I can find is for Bernaric. The most problematic, unfortunately, is Munda. So we have this yod in the blood word. In the other words I could find reflexes for, we seem to have a zero onset in Mundari. This H in the Karia, I believe that's secondary. So that actually implies a 0. And I see the Mundarists are nodding, so I'm quite confident about that. Right, that's just pasted straight out of Pinot. So, yeah. So actually, what we have are multiple cases of a 0 correspondence in Munda, and we just have to explain this yod. And I think that probably we're talking about syllable restructuring because we have a long vowel which gets restructured into 2 syllables, and so we now have an epenthetic glide. So really that yod isn't a problem. The reflex in Munda is 0. So I don't have a lot of good examples. I'm going to rely on my friends to find more for me, but it does look like the regular reflexes of H and S are usually 0 in Munda languages. So here's a couple of H initial words in Austroasiatic where we have zeros. This H in Santali, I believe, is epenthetic. Again, I see nodding, that's very reassuring. The S, often the reflex is 0, although in Karia it looks like we have 0 in pre-syllables and S in main syllables. Again, I don't know how regular that is. So actually, we can say that probably Munda is not informative for this problem, and what we're really dealing with is an HS correspondence. So let's go forward. Now, here's the traditional Austroasiatic, Proto Austroasiatic syllable onsets, and this has been like a consensus since the 1960s, and it's based on the idea that this is the set of onsets that you find in conservative Austroasiatic languages, those that haven't restructured and lost their voicing contrast and that sort of thing. So generally, we took the view that this was the set of onsets we would reconstruct. In 2014, I suggested a implosive palatal based on correspondence in Kituic. Subsequently, Ryan Gevin has suggested that this might be secondary, and has got some arguments for that. I always said, like in my handbook entry, that this was a pretty weak reconstruction, but anyway, we can leave it there with a question mark. I then later reconstructed a laminal affricate. Here are a couple of etymologies where this occurs. The primary one is the word for bitter. We seem to have a regular correspondence in fern And there's some other examples too, but they have even fewer attestations. So this is pretty weak, but it brought up to my mind that we might be looking at some sort of laminal prepalatal series. And I even thought that maybe if my voiced palatal was real, that maybe it belonged in this series and had some sort of laminal GIF Africa, but I'm not going to push that. So, thinking that there might be a laminal series, I thought this SH correspondence might be better reconstructed with this shit. You're going to finish before time. So, we have implications. If I stick with this new fricative and at least this Africa, we now have some asymmetry in the system. So does this indicate that these are just artifacts of my fevered dreams, or do we have a real slot here that's just unfilled and these have been, merged out of the system at some earlier period and maybe we'll never know? So I'm more or less happy to treat this shirt as a placeholder for the time being to say we have this SH correspondence, and by reconstructing forms with this, we're saying this is what the reflexes are or expected to be throughout the family. But I'm getting increasingly confident that we are dealing with a distinct phoneme, and probably it was quite understandable that it merged with S or H in particular being rather infrequent. Perhaps it was more frequent in the past. Now, an interesting outcome of this, if it is real, the distribution is very striking because the S reflexes are in this northern area and the H reflexes are basically everywhere else, assuming the zero in Munda comes from H, which is otherwise the normal outcome of the H. I think that the shirt to her change is quite natural. It would happen, doesn't need any conditioning. It didn't just be a spontaneous volition across lots of languages and not necessarily be a single event. But I think that the shift and the merger with X is more likely to be a single event, in which case this might count as evidence towards a hypothetical Northern Austroasiatic division. And as I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, my pet theory is that Austroasiatic spread across two main vectors. I think the homeland was more or less the lower Red River area, northern Vietnam, and we have one inland vector where speakers carried languages up the Red River and its tributaries and eventually spread out to where we find Khasi, Palang, etc. today. And then there was another vector basically around the coastline, which explains the distributions today of groups like Aslian, Nicobarese, Munda, and others. I'll just point out that the earliest sites for Mon, for Khmer, are also coastal, and all the inland sites for them are all later. And we have strong evidence that there was some sort of Austroasiatic branch on the coast here that accounts for a lot of the substrate in Chumik. So I think we have a real possibility that I've stumbled onto a phonological correlate of this hypothesis of a basic split between those languages that went around the coast and those that went inland. It's a relatively weak signal, but I may have actually found something more than just geography, archaeology, and genetics to back up my version of the homeland theory. And I'll stop there. Thank you.